Everyone is talking about the xenophobic attacks in South Africa against other Africans, but nobody is asking why history keeps repeating itself, and not just there, across the entire continent. So let me ask you this. Can you name one African country that has never expelled Africans for whatever reasons? The comment section is yours, and while you type, let's take a quick walk through African history, because we keep falling for the same nonsense over and over again, and I'll prove my point in a moment. But in all these cases, xenophobia is always presented as patriotism to justify intolerance and the exclusion of others. Look, it's the same old divide and rule strategy, and it works like a charm for politicians who are incapable of governing. So they divide, stigmatize to distract the people and to hide from their shortcomings. You see, in 1983 Nigeria, this popular but often overlooked bag was officially baptized Ghana must go. And this is a point in Nigerian history that Ghanaians would rather forget, because Ghanaians, among other African nationals, were expelled from Nigeria. Here you can see a picture of Ghanaians at the border between Nigeria and Benin, waiting to be allowed into Benin to continue their journey home. But tragically, at the same border in Lagos, many African lives were lost due to chaos and stampedes. I mean, these were Africans in search of a better way of life within the continent, and they chose to move to Nigeria to settle and start a new life. And their lives improved there, which is exactly what you would expect. But after a little while, the host country began accusing them of the usual stories, pushing the same old narrative we find around the world today. They were accused of stealing all the jobs, importing crimes into the country, and were blamed for the failing economy. But my favorite line across the globe is, they are stealing our women. That's a matter of national security. So politicians, like vultures, they capitalized on the people's frustration, blamed foreigners for all the ills in the country, and campaigned on the promise that if they were elected, they would send all the foreigners back home to their countries to fix it. So the slogan, "Go home," isn't anything new. In fact, some countries add their own twist to it. Go back to your country. And yet, surprisingly, the politicians delivered on their promises, which is not something you often see. Now, you see, in my village, they say a mouse, even drunk, can never forget the cat's corner. So what most people don't know is that the Ghanaian government, like Arsenal against PSG, was the first to score the first goal. So the word in the street is that Nigeria saw an opportunity to equalize, and they took it. Because in Ghana, 14 years earlier, in 1969 to be precise, the government deported 2.5 million undocumented Africans. And in this case, the majority of deportees were Nigerians. So as per customs, African foreigners in search of a better way of life within the continent, on top of being labeled undocumented, were accused of stealing all the jobs and bringing crimes in the country, and probably also of stealing women. This is the flavor to the story. But what we often forget is that the people we call foreigners have lived in our countries for decades, meaning they have assimilated to our ways in their own ways, which has culturally enriched them. And in some cases, we even find that they marry and have children in the host countries. Like they say in French, celui qui travaille à l'hôtel mange à l'hôtel, meaning those who work at the hotel eat at the hotel. However, the Ghanaian government under Prime Minister Kofi Busia invoked the controversial Alien Compliance Order. You see, it was a move that gave foreigners 2 weeks to either regularize their stay or leave. And in this case also, African lives were lost at the Aflao border with Togo, which is the busiest land border crossing between the two countries. Now, in light of what we know now, do I think Ghana overreacted by repatriating its citizens from South Africa? Absolutely not. In fact, I'll even go further. I believe the Ghanaian government acted like a responsible country by providing the necessary tools for its citizens abroad who felt threatened to leave. I mean, they have scars older than 40 years old. Now, imagine if this was the response across African governments when African students were stuck in Ukraine. Just imagine. Now, even though I think this was a political move by Ghana, by the Ghanaian government to score points in the heart of its citizens, because from my understanding, the South African government and their Ghanaian counterparts were already engaged in talks regarding this matter. And then suddenly, Ghana turned around and pulled this move. But what if it was the Ghanaian diaspora who felt vulnerable and reached out to their embassy and chose to leave rather than find out? I think that's also a possibility to consider. Look, a few years ago, I planned to travel to South Africa, but that's when I realized that South Africa is not just a country where an African passport holder can just wake up one morning and show up to. You have to be eating your fruit and veggies and stay hydrated the whole year, except, of course, you're from a SADC country. And I also noticed that South Africa, Botswana, and maybe other African nations have the same robust requirements as EU countries. But that's when I learned that some, if not all, EU countries and US citizens can just roll out of bed and show up to South Africa without going through the same challenges African passport holders have to deal with. I mean, unlike the dangerous routes to Europe where people bypass border controls entirely, for South Africa it seems like most people have to pass through an immigration officer, which would be me, hopefully this year or next year. So the question becomes, if the system is already strict for Africans to enter South Africa, how are there so many undocumented people who are owning businesses and working? I mean, who's benefiting from this? But I say all that to say this. What is currently happening in South Africa is concerning, yes, but it isn't something we haven't experienced across the African continent. And these were just two examples, but I know many stories like this. That's why it is easy to see the patterns. I mean, this is a game where politicians deliberately exploit the frustration just to advance their careers closer to power. But unfortunately, some people are willingly participating in the circus in exchange for empty promises. Now, like I often say, this doesn't explain that, but still this helps us understand that. And by understanding that is not a justification for this, because understanding all the historical factors, patterns that leads to this friction is crucial and can serve as a catalyst for change, but not serve as a justification for the recent attacks of Africans and their businesses in South Africa. But personally, I think it would be dishonest and morally wrong to believe that 60 plus million South Africans out there are xenophobic. The truth is, when it comes to migration, the targets change, the borders change, decades change, but the script never does. However, the question I think we should all be asking ourselves is, who is benefiting from all these unnecessary division? I mean, today we are staring at South Africa, but from the corner of my eye, I can already see two on the stove starting to boil, because the people's grievances and frustration are like untreated open wounds. And from time to time, people are adding salt on them, while the government and institutions in charge watch without acting, managing the frustration until they no longer can.
We, ni nini?